So if we could just have everybody introduce themselves right now, please.
My name is Rochelle Milligan. I'm a resident here.
Thomas Frederick, I'm a board member, vice president.
Hi, my name's Kate Davis. I come from London. In London I run a big housing association, which is a not-for-profit provider of 36,000 homes in London, and come here to learn from you and also to share what we know in London. Thank you for having us. It's been great to have a look round. We were particularly honoured to be able to see inside two of the flats, which was really interesting and really kind that people let us in to look at their homes, and we feel really good to be here. Thank you very much. The nice weather helps too, of course.
Right, I'm Jeff Bell. I'm originally from Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I moved to London when I was about 22, 23, and I settled in an area called Woodbury Down. Woodbury Down is currently being knocked down and being replaced with new homes. And I'm the chairperson of the Tenants and Resident Organisation in Woodbury Down. And having just walked around the area, the thing that struck me is that in many ways it is very similar to the old estate which we've been sort of living in, with the sort of tallish buildings and sort of green sort of plain areas at the sort of where sort of children can sort of play or hang around or whatever, you know. So I mean that the sort of similarities between the two areas are actually quite sort of striking when I sort of walk around. Of course, the difference for ours is that ours are being knocked down and being replaced with hopefully new, better football homes.
Candy Vasquez, Secretary of the Residents Association.
You got me? Eva Barr, board member.
Lady over there.
Oh, I'm Heather. I work at Sage Pacey.
I'm Jenny Osborne. I'm Chief Executive of a really small, almost like a charity in England called TPAS. We work across all of England. I live myself in Manchester, which is in the north. I work across the whole of England. And what we do is around tenant engagement, making sure that tenants and residents are working with their social housing landlord to kind of look at services, see how things can be improved, see how they can save money, and then do the sort of stuff that you're doing here that we've had a look at today in terms of community facilities and doing stuff that brings the community together.
Hi, I'm Jessica Katz. I'm the Executive Director of the Citizens Housing and Planning Council here in New York. We invited this group from London to come to New York because we really felt like we had some things to learn from London about how they did regeneration of public housing. They had much more public housing in London than we have here, and they sort of hit the crisis point with it about 20 plus years ago. So they've had some more experience than we've had about actually finding a positive way to move forward. I think we felt kind of stuck here in New York, where everyone's just sort of pointing fingers at each other and blaming each other for how what's gone wrong with public housing, and we haven't really found a way yet to move forward in a positive way to find a way to rebuild public housing and preserve it in a way that will be great for the long term. So we really thought that the London case would be a good place to learn from. In particular, they did bring in developers like Kate's organization that rebuilt a lot of the public housing similar to like the way we're talking about RAD here in New York. But at the same time as they elevated the role of the affordable housing industry, they also elevated the role of the tenants. So they really gave the tenants real power in terms of making some decisions about the plans, and that partnership between the tenants and the development teams really helped move the ball forward and make some decisions that were helpful to the specific to the developments about how to create a better public housing development. So like Jeff will talk more, but with where Jeff lives was a 2,000 unit development that is being demolished in phases and turned into a 5,500 unit development, all in partnership with the tenants. So Jeff, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, well when
Excuse me 1 minute. We didn't introduce ourselves. I know we're not on the table.
So Ethel Velez, the Resident Association President.
Charlene Davis, Treasurer. Mignon Taylor, housing tenant.
I'm Sarah Watson. I work at Citizens Housing Planning Council in New York, but originally from London. Worked on some regeneration of public housing there.
And Stu.
And I'm Stu Reed. I'm with Digital Divide Partners, and we are in partnership with Ethel Velez and Johnson Houses to produce a number of shows here. We just finished with the Wisdom Table, which is one of our weekly shows we produce here. So we're helping to give a voice to the residents.
So it's picked up in the whole of the estate or a bit further afield?
Well, it's two things. One is broadcast on FM radio in the area within the development itself. It's also streamed on the internet, so it's available globally as well.
Wow. So you're multi-purpose there with all your
Absolutely.
equipment?
Yes.
Okay. Right then. Okay. Well, let me very briefly tell you the story of our estate. The houses were in such a state that something needed to sort of happen to them. They needed either to be fixed or to be knocked down and replaced with new homes. The council didn't have any money to actually do them up. So the cheapest way was to enter into a partnership with a developer, knock down all the homes and replace them with new homes. But there would sort of also be, as well as the 2,000 social homes, there would be 3,000 private homes, which would help to finance the building of the social homes. Now, I think most people, most of the social tenants, supported that scheme because it meant they would be moving into new homes. But we said something else. We said it's not simply enough to have nice new homes. We want to have a say in what those homes look like, where they'll be placed, what the parks will sort of look like, whether the schools will be provided, what sort of shops are sort of coming in to the area, and generally how the community will be built rather than simply building houses. And I think that is sort of something which we have always sort of fought for. And so through a long process of sort of threats and sweet talking, we eventually won the agreement of the local council and then the developers to have this sort of say. So it now means essentially that all the major features of the new development have to be agreed by all the major partners, which is the council, ourselves, the developers and the housing association. So that gives us real power, and I think what we bring to that, and I think the developers have finally recognised this after a long period of sort of questioning, if you like. What this means is that because we live in the area, we know what works, we know what the area needs, we know what the local homes need, and actually the developers, we're almost doing their job for them, you know, because we're saying, hey, you should build the homes here, you should have this size of rooms, and so on, because we actually live in the area. And sort of local knowledge is a great thing when you're actually planning the type of quite large-scale regeneration which is happening in there. So we're determined, we've been determined from the very start, if you like, to have our say and to make sure that not only do they listen to us, but they act on what we say, and that is, if you like, the continuing negotiations and discussions we have, and it's basically what sort of we say is a way to tenants are.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk much more generally than in your example, really. We work with tenants and residents, but the reason why we work with tenants and residents is we want to work with them from the start on any project and really early on any project. So for us, and for me at TPAS, it's kind of almost worse if you bring people in too late on a project. If you ask people questions too late, it's actually worse than being asked not at all. Best to get people in right from the start, helping to make decision choices very early. And I think that's a principle that's really important and has been part of the success in London and in England in particular. We do a role called Independent Tenant Advisor as my organisation. That's a bit I'll talk about a little bit more here. And what that is when landlords are facing, as they did many years ago, no money to be able to do up the properties. The properties were only going down and down and down. So some decisions needed to be made about what we could do to raise investment. my organisation would come in and work with the tenant and residents to make sure that they fully understood what was going to happen, to fully understand the implications and some of the options that were on the table. And it might be that we all started off with 6 and 7 different options, and actually through a process of the residents asking those really important questions, really challenging the information that people were promising, because everyone promises the earth, don't they, with these things, you whittle it down to 2 or 3 really, really valid options. Now, one of the big options that happened in England was what we call stock transfer, so where the housing stock was transferred to an association like Kate will talk about. And I think the key thing about that is that a lot of promises were made as part of that. So for residents to believe that this was going to make a difference, that the money was going to come forward, that change in their houses was going to happen, a series of promises had to be made, and then the residents monitored those promises being delivered on over the next 2, 5, 10 years, however long it might take. And that for me is the key difference. Jeff mentioned empowerment, and I think that's a really important word. At my organisation, we talk about tenant engagement. Now, tenant engagement could be simply someone comes and knocks on your door and asks your opinion, asks you a question. I bet you've had loads of surveys and questions over the years, haven't you? That's engagement to me. The next kind of level is involvement. So not only are you asked, you've answered a survey, but you're involved in something like this. You're actually actively getting involved, you're part of things, you're discussing things. And then empowerment, real empowerment, is about when you're allowed to make decisions yourselves. You perhaps have budgets that you manage yourselves, where you can really challenge your landlord and say, that isn't what you promised me, that isn't good enough. That's when real empowerment happens as well. So I think it's about understanding those different stages of the journey, if you like. It's really important, but we've seen tenants taking real control of their housing in England, and some real success as well.
So in the UK example, it's like there was an agreement first that there's no money coming, right? There's no help coming to try to fix this, so we have to figure out another way. So a developer gets brought in, and then you negotiate what the development plan is. So there are new stakeholders being brought into the mix, but as you do that, you also are asking for the tenant's opinion in a legally binding way. So there was an agreement signed between the developer and the tenants that they agreed that the decisions were going to get made together. Now those decisions were big decisions, much more than the sort of renovation or RAD transfer like we're talking here. This was a 10 and 15-year project to one by one demolish buildings and build new ones over the course of a generation. So the development went from 2,000 units to 5,500 units. And that feels impossible in New York, right? But it was done because the tenants got together and decided that their best chance to get the best apartments for themselves was to create this new housing also on the block. And other tenants associations might have come up with a different type of a plan, but by leaving it for the developer and the tenants to work together on this plan, we came up with, much more radical transformation than anything really that is on the table now in New York. So we wanted to put it forward as sort of a new conversation around how tenants could be involved to get past, in the hopes to get past some of the stalemate and some of the fears about privatization of what can you do if you're bringing in these new parties that people are worried about trusting. What are some of the other ways that you can counterbalance that with some power on the tenant side to bring everybody together to make some really difficult decisions and try to bring in as many resources as possible.
So what's interesting for me is that how much was your government involved with you making these decisions? When we use the word engagement, when we use the word empowerment, your country had to have been open to that.
Yeah.
So how did that process even happen?
So one of the interesting things I found was just going around some of the tenants on the estate. Asked one of the ladies taking us around, who are those people? Are they from the developers? And I am a developer, and I'm kind of proud to be a developer, but I'm not a developer in terms of making a profit out of development. I'm in a developer making a profit from development that then goes right back into the social housing, because we're a charity and we're motivated by providing homes for people, for poor people, people without many resources. And I think what we're talking about in development terms is we're talking about building homes for people, not getting rid of homes for people. And if development is seen as the people who tear down the community and raise it to the ground, of course there's going to be horrendous suspicion about that. We went today and saw two people's homes. That is the most wonderful thing. We went to see someone's homes, places where people have been born, people have been brought up. You can't talk about those places as developments, as you know, they're homes. They belong to people, and so the only people who should have a real say in that are the people who live in them. That's where we start. You start with the people who live there. You've got a lot of organisation here. You're a president of a huge number of tenants. Throughout New York, there are a lot of tenant leaders, and there are new leaders coming through and young people being trained in your fantastic centres here to take up leadership roles in society. So that's what you should be in the lead here, as simple as that. And I think that's where we believe, instead of being on the defensive, you kind of need to go on an attack. I don't want to tell you to do things or incite a riot or anything, but I do think tenants have to take control of the process. You have to say, we're in control, okay, we want to work within the realities, and we understand that money doesn't grow on trees, we all know that. But if we are in the lead and we talk about what our community wants, what we need something better than this. You know, I saw nice homes, and I know you've made them attractive and you've brought up families there and so on. You probably deserve something better than this, you know? And I think have the inspiration and the desire to take control of it and to design the future and to create somewhere where your children can also have a good place to live. A number of the ladies were saying, our own kids can't get this, you know, they've been waiting for years. They don't have housing. They're homeless, or they're living in shelters, or they're sharing. That's something that needs to be addressed by the city, isn't it? And I think we will do our best to talk to your politicians and your developers about the need to get tenants in control, because that is what will make the difference. You can't do a big project like this to people. You can only do it with people, and taking an equal place at the table, be very influential, do things like Jeff has been doing, you know, working with other tenants, working out how to get the best deal in the circumstances, so you can raise your standard of living, so you can have better housing, so you can have a better future, and to provide more homes for people in your families who need to be housed. I think that's the inspiration we have. I mean, I haven't told you about all the things we've done, we're happy to answer questions, but I can see the energy and power of this community, and to some extent, when I look at it, I think we deserve better, if I can say that.
One of the things you talk about, you said you were not-for-profit. The development that's going on in this city is about profit.
Correct.
So that leaves us at a disadvantage of trying to even fight for anything, because at the end of the day, they really don't consider anything that the residents say as anything of value.
Jeff, do you want to take it back?
Yeah, but Jeff's working with a private for-profit developer, actually.
But you see, I mean, you can actually play their game sometimes. You know, you can sort of play their game sometimes, because, you know, for instance, Woodbury Down has just won this award for a sort of national award for community-led regeneration. Right now, if I'm a property developer, I will look at that and I'll say, and which is what I say to them, hey, put that on your posters. Come and buy a home, because they also sell homes to private people as well, you know, private owners as well. Use this. Come to Woodbury Down, where they're building a new type of society, if you like, and this is something which they can, you know, they can sort of come and sort of live here, because this will be a decent and nice and a better place to actually live, because this area is actually run by the community. And the developers look at that and say, yes, this is a good selling point. So sometimes you have to appeal to the sort of basics of them. But I mean, the other thing is, just to sort of come back to sort of question you asked earlier, is that things have never gone smoothly. You know, we negotiate with the developers on a weekly, on sometimes a daily basis, right? And one of our strengths that we have now established very good ties with the local politicians, who are generally speaking backs us, right? Which hasn't always been the case, right? But certainly recently, the local council have tended to sort of back us. And so if the local council back the tenants and the tenants work with the local council, then that makes us both more powerful, right? And it means that, if you like, the property developers think twice about, you know, taking on that type of sort of alliance. So it's always very important to make sort of friends, to try and, because, you know, tenants by themselves don't have that much power on sort of less you make a big sort of noise, and having an alliance with the local politicians is quite a significant way to sort of give you actually more power.
But also talking about the profit motive, or sort of working within the current real estate system as it exists in New York, you know, the tenants of Woodbury Downs had to make some really tough decisions. We realized that there was no more waiting around for a government subsidy to come, because we've been waiting for a generation for that, and decided that the best way for them to get the best homes for themselves was to have this developer build market rate housing, so that that would fund those homes. So that's not the answer to every development, but it seems to be working. And there was trade-offs in terms of how many units, how big, how tall, but if each of those trade-offs, if that's well understood by everybody, and you kind of learn how to play the game of saying, this person makes more money if I get more of this, if we do more units this way, then we get more of this other thing that we want, and just sort of being clear about what your goals are and what your demands are, but then also be willing to negotiate that in a way that everyone kind of understands the trade-offs in the same way, I think is something that seems to be happening in the UK that we seem to be stuck on here.
I would say, just on, I know Jed's estate quite well, and if you saw it, you would be really impressed, I think. The private developers come there because the setting is very beautiful. There's a big span of water that's got a lot of water birds on it, and there's an area to walk around. It's like nature right in the city, so it's a very attractive area. So they've been able to sell some of the houses for really high prices, but as a result now the whole estate is what you might call aspirational. You know, it's like anybody with money would want to live there, but of course the social tenants are just integrated into the scheme. So it's not just social tenants anymore, and the money that's been put in is really a lot, because it's been there to satisfy the needs of the people with money, but it has been shared for all, and people are living cheek by jowl without any sense of segregation or distinction between people. But I think one thing we have found in the UK is every example is different, and what you might do in East Harlem might be different to a different part of New York, and you know, have its own qualities and features and character, you know, that you would have designed, that things that really matter to you. So, you know, you don't have a lake, but you've got old trees, you've got a basketball court, you've got a lot of people who've got dogs, you know, you need all facilities for lots of small children, you need water features so they can play, and you've got hot weather and you've got cold weather. All these things need to be sort of built into your design. But the people who know all that are the people who live here. You know this area like the back of your hand. A lot of people lived here for 2 generations, 3 generations even. Nobody coming into this knows anything about it compared to what you do. So who's the best to sort of decide its future? It's got to be led by you. But I think,
Can I just tell a story about these sort of lakes, which is quite interesting, because this was 30 years ago. The people who owned the lakes were going to sell it to property developers, and that meant the lakes or the reservoirs were going to, flattened out. There were going to be houses built in them, not sort of social housing, high development housing for rich people, and the lakes and everything else was sort of going to go. And that meant, and I mean, it's a sort of wildlife centre as well. I mean, it's a wonderful place to live. So the local people waged a campaign which lasted 10 years to stop developers doing that, concreting over these reservoirs. And eventually that campaign won, right? And the funny thing now is about this, having knocked out one set of developers from, you know, building exclusive private homes on these lakes, the developers now, it is one of their strongest selling points. Come and live here and look over these beautiful lakes, you know? So to an extent, the fact that ordinary people fought for these lakes, and of course that is, the fact that ordinary people fought for these lakes is now a selling point. But for us, for the people who sort of live here, it shows, well, if those people 30 years ago could take on, which were very, very powerful forces trying to sort of concrete over those sort of lakes, could sort of take on those people and win, then we can, if it comes to the crunch, if sort of necessary, we can wage similar fights, and it's proved a real, you know, a real lesson, if you like, again from the past.
I have a question. So when you talk about the social and the high, because here we go according to medium income, low income, very low income. You know, how do you do your housing over there? Do you do it the same way like we do it over here, based on area medium income? Do you have like 50-30s, you know, 80-20s? 80-20s, I mean the high income of the 80% and the 20% low income, or vice versa? How is it that you, when you're doing development, especially you, because I've done development, but you said, you know, when you do the development and you set aside to social people, you call the social people the low income?
So we use the word social housing for council housing, housing association, I think what you call public housing, or you sometimes call the projects. I mean, in the UK, 20% of the population live in social housing, and I think in America it's about 2% or something like that. So it's a much more common thing for ordinary working class people to live in this sort of housing. When we build it new, we are always doing a mixed community for two reasons. One is we can't afford to just do the social housing, which is for the poorest, or the people in the greatest need. So we do a mid-market housing as well, an intermediate product for people who are better off but not wealthy. And then we do housing for the market, which is market rent or market sale. And the profit we make from the market rent and the market sale go on keeping the prices down of the other products, basically. Subsidised, And it means that when we build, we do about a third, so you have a mixed community. We don't build great big social housing estates anymore like this. I've lived on estates like this, and there's nothing really wrong with them, but we feel it can be stigmatized sometimes, that people can say, you come from this area, you're therefore, you know, we know all about you, we've classified you already, we know what you are, you know. If you can have ordinary houses in ordinary streets or attractive developments which are aspirational like Woodbury Down, now instead of it being an estate that nobody really wanted to be on, it's now become a highly desirable area. And you know, to capture some of that uplift in value for ordinary people is the objective. Because what, you know, the price of housing, the building of housing in New York and in London is so high that it has to have a subsidy from somewhere. This is the thing, you know, there isn't any money. The local authority doesn't have money, the people who live in it don't have money. Where does the money come from? It has to come from richer people by giving them something they want, whether it's giving something to the developer or giving something to the richer homeowner. So the money's got to be taken, you know, like Robin Hood, from the rich to be given to the poor. And that's why we all exist. That's what we're motivated by. Try and create more equality and social justice.
So I want to say we have our time limit right now. It's 5:05.
Oh.
I want to thank everybody for coming. This is very interesting. It's something that we can talk about for a long time, because I think there would be a lot to learn from what you've accomplished in London. It's almost inspiring to say that there could be hope, and maybe there'll be hope for us here to stop what's going on with our housing, you know, because we're losing housing for the poor. So again, I want to appreciate you for being here, and taking the time to even come into our community and having this dialogue with us. And we hope it's not the end, that it's something that can continue. We'd love to see pictures. I don't know if we're going to be going to London anytime soon. But it could be a thought.
It is a thought.
It is a thought. So with that, I want to say thank you, you know, again, for coming. And I know I'll be seeing you again.
We salute you and your achievements, and we felt very comfortable being in your community. Thank you very much.
We have also lots to learn from you too. I'm sure. You know, I'm sure there's a lot you can sort of teach.
This was just a small amount of time for us right now, so the introductory right now is great.
You have to sort of come to sort of London to show you around. We'll have a great time.
But one thing I do want to mention is that a lot of people that live in public housing have been very successful people as well. You know, and so you got Sotomayor, who's a lawyer. I mean, the judge, a city judge, comes from housing. So you have people that is not, you know, that is being stigmatized. That's not the makeup anymore of, you know, I don't know how London views it, but here in the States.
Well, it's an excuse, isn't it? I think it can be a way to kind of say that, like you say, we understand who lives in these homes, and so we know what we can do to them. We can do to them, not with them. And actually, we have to continually challenge that and say that isn't right. That doesn't represent our community at all. So we talk a lot. I mean, what I will take back from here already is we talk a lot about asset-based strengths in communities. So don't come to a community and talk about what it hasn't got. It hasn't got enough parks, or it hasn't got enough decent homes. You come to a community and go, but what has it got? Well, you've got this. And you know, you start from a place like this community centre and go, well, you know, we'll start from here because this is huge strength, huge abilities, all of that, and then we'll start to build the rest around it. And I think that's where we have learned out in England, is not stop going into communities trying to find out what's wrong with them. Let's talk about what's already brilliant about us and then build them back up. So that's the issue.
So we're going to end on that. I'm a timekeeper too.